Hello everyone, welcome to our new video lecture on the sociology of innovation and entrepreneurship. And for this video, we're going to be talking about innovation systems. Now, first, we're going to discuss about the assumptions of why we can look at innovation from a systems approach, and then we'll focus on the different theoretical assumptions on national innovation systems, on the assumptions, on the factors and actors behind national innovation systems, and then we're also going to talk about the main functions and activities of national innovation systems. Now, since the very beginning of this course, we talked about classical views and more contemporary views of innovation. And in the last 25 years of all of the research that has been done in relation to innovations, the current perspectives that is most used for studying about innovations and how it is applied in society in the last few decades has been the innovation systems approach. And then this has been a result of innovation-related phenomena that has the following assumptions. First, we have seen changes in the production and regulation of economy. So, production is in the micro and the regulation of economy in terms of the meso and the macro. From the time of the industrial period, and then it has changed when we after World War II, and as industrialization happened, and then as developed nations moved from industrial economies to more knowledge economies, and as previously underdeveloped nations become developing nations, they're slowly becoming industrialized. And then as we moved from individual inventors to corporations and companies and organizations being the one who champions innovations. So we've seen these changes, and therefore the old ways of looking at why innovation happens in society may not really completely explain the things that are happening in terms of innovative ideas and innovative products and services that we are experiencing in the now. And thus there needs to be a theoretical shift, a theoretical paradigm shift in terms of how we should look at how innovations flourish in society. And there is now a bigger acceptance on the relational character of the economy rather than just economy being a top-down approach. We know that we should also look at the social institutions perspective of economy, that it's not only that economy does not happen in a vacuum, and that all sectors in society, the government, the academia, the private sector, even the civil society organizations have something to do with how the economy is going. And therefore, since economy also coincides with how innovation flourishes in a society, then we can also say that innovation in an economy is also relational. So there, we're looking at more social institutional context, and also we're seeing that it's not only in terms of the social institutions but also on territorial articulation, and that this brings us back to why there are certain areas in a given country that could be considered as a technology hub, like for example the Silicon Valley, because there are many territorial or geographical features of that specific area that has made it more welcoming for innovation. And of course, the second assumption is that the innovations that we're seeing today isn't the same innovations we've seen, a century ago or 50 years ago. When we started entering the fourth industrial revolution, we're seeing artificial intelligence, we're seeing robotics, we're seeing Internet of Things, we're seeing biomedical advances. Then we are now, instead of just addressing basic needs, we are creating needs. You think of Apple, you think of Samsung, you think of Tesla, developing products that don't really have a current need yet, or addresses a need that we don't realize are actually our needs. So this is kind of where the high-tech sectors are going, and previous classical and previous contemporary perspective of innovations may not be able to appreciate how these things happen. And there's now increased scientification of the process of innovation. So unlike in the classical times, no, wherein innovation is democratized to anyone who has an idea. Now we kind of look at innovation as something that is really that is being developed by scientific communities, by science communities, as supported by private or public organizations. No? So we rely highly on science and technology for the things that we consider as innovation, even if these are like process innovations or marketing innovations. For example, when we talk about marketing innovation nowadays, we the bigger companies, no, rely on artificial intelligence, on machine learning, to really tell you who to target as your next market. No, so even market decisions are also being infiltrated, no, by this fourth industrial revolution innovations. And so therefore, no, looking at these new innovations that are less human induced but more technology induced, really needs a paradigm shift. No, why do these things happen? Why does society allow this to happen? And what are the institutions in society that allow this to flourish in society? And of course, there's an increase in the contribution of science-based sectors in innovation. No? Like I said, biotechnology, pharmaceuticals, and we've seen how quickly pharmaceuticals innovate with the many studies that are being churned out for vaccinations in the COVID-19 era. And of course, ICTs include mo na dyan sila, Internet of Things, machine learning, artificial intelligence. And then we're now seeing intercompany partnerships, which classical thinkers wouldn't be able to see during the time because there wasn't really that interconnectedness yet, brought about by digital media and internet during the classical thinkers' time. And this time, you can see foreign partnerships, and then of course local partnerships across organizations within similar and different levels, like private org to private org, or private org to academe, or academe to government, or government to private orgs. So there's in order for us to think of innovations, or innovations really come up as things that are coming out not only because of a single organization, but we see multiple organizations working on a specific innovation output. Think Apple, think iPhone. When you think about iPhone, it's not, the parts of the iPhone, it's not completely just Apple made, diba? We know that for example, the screens of Apple, the Gorilla Glass, is proprietary ng Gorilla Glass company. We know that the LED is made by Samsung. So in order for us to appreciate and get the full experience of iPhone, it's not just all products and supplied by Apple. They actually outsource it, and they actually partner with other companies for us to be able to have that iPhone that we enjoy now. And then next, there's now an increasing economic globalization that, of course, our classical thinkers were not really knowledgeable about. Of course, during the time of Marx, for instance, or Somberg, or Durkheim, there was a lot of connections with other localities, and usually in the context of colonialization, but not really the economic globalization that we have today, wherein we have economic agreements from one country to another. We're talking about decreasing of tariffs. We're talking about foreign investments happening in a country. So because of economic globalization that is hastened by internet, hastened by digital communications that are now more expansive than ever because of increasing ICT, 4G, 5G, and everything. And therefore, because there is the economic globalization, we also have the international competition, and that international competition is a previously untapped factor for innovation that was not really seen by classical thinkers that we are seeing today. That when we talk about innovations, when we talk about creating new products, we just don't think about our market as our local market, but we talk about market as we talk about market losses because another international brand can get our market from us. No? So because of that expanding competition, no? And then you just think about ASEAN, for instance. No? So when ASEAN started to, have more agreements with each other, the countries, then as more tariffs go low, more countries see other countries as a place for foreign investments, and therefore the local companies are threatened by the foreign investments coming in, and therefore that competition, that expansion of competition, stimulates innovation. And a lot of our production of goods and services has become more increasingly knowledge intensive. No, there's more research being done now because we want to diversify. No, we want to differentiate. When we want to innovate, we have to put in the work on research. No, because we can just create we cannot just create a new product without looking at what is already out there, looking at the current problems that we want to solve. And so it becomes more knowledge intensive, and this for big private companies, for the government, for academia, knowledge intensive means putting money into actual research, whether that's in a laboratory, or in a field work, because you want to get as the best innovation possible, the most effective product possible, the most efficient service possible. Then you have to put in the work in terms of producing that knowledge, and at the same time, the one who holds knowledge, the one who holds the patent, are the ones kind of powerful in this case, because you have to pay them, you have to pay their products in order for you to get them. So so it has become more knowledge intensive. Now, again, because of the precedents that I have discussed earlier, based from the book of Ramelia, there is now that current perspective wherein you look at the flourishing of innovation through innovation systems. And according to Ramelia, there are three innovation systems that we can look at. But for this specific video, we will just focus on national innovation systems because that is more closer to home sa Pilipinas. So the first one is the spatial geographical criteria, or the systems of innovation that works in a specific space or geography. In our case, the national innovation systems. There's also local innovation systems, but we will not be covering that anymore for the course. And we have an industrial technological criteria, or sectoral innovation systems. And I've probably given an example of this in terms of the iPhone. It's not necessary that the partnerships or the systems that build the iPhone is only situated in one geographical location. But for example, the workers working could be in China, the headquarters in the United States, the LED panels are being made in Korea. So the integration, the system is found within a sector instead of within a geographical location. And then based on the type of actors who are working, for example, who are the organizations working on a project, then we look at the triple helix model. So that's the third one. But we're more going to focus on national innovation systems for this course because, like I said, it's more closer to home in the Philippines. So now we go to the different definitions of the National Innovation Systems, or NIS. According to Rosenberg, it's a set of institutions whose interactions determine the innovative performance of national firms. So again, we're going back to that idea of innovation happens not in a vacuum, or there's no an organization does not innovate only on its own, but it's actually innovating because it is working with other social institutions. Another is that NIS are elements and their relationships which interact in the production, diffusion, and use of new and economically useful knowledge, and are either located within or rooted inside the borders of a nation state. So this one is important. Each country has their own national innovation system, and that is going to be your assignment later on, and I'll share that with you in Canvas. But also look at innovation systems, not only just talking about institutions, but also talking about how innovations are made, are produced, how it's also diffused, because national innovation systems help also in making sure that the innovative products and services that are being produced in a given economy or in a given state is being diffused. It's being put out in the market, it's being commercialized or being used by whoever needs it. There. Next, NIS is all-important economic, social, political, organizational, institutional, and other factors that influence development, diffuse, and use of innovation according to Edquist. So this is similar to the first two innovation NIS definitions. So what are the theoretical assumptions why NIS is a relevant way of looking at how innovations are, and why countries should look at establishing a well-articulated NIS. So first, national economies present a variety of specializations which regard productive, commercial, and also cognitive structures. These productive, cognitive specialization are interdependent and co-evolve in a path-dependent manner. They follow trajectory shaped by history and previous experience that is common in that nation, slowly transforming themselves as a result not only of economic change but also of learning process developed by the actors. So let's kind of look at the segments that are salient here. So first is that national economies have different specializations that are found in that economy, just like in any other economy or any other nation. No organization, no single organization has that. But a certain nation has specific specializations that are found in their nation that kind of drives what type of innovations will be produced. Like for example, in the Philippines, we would see more agricultural and fisheries innovations compared, for example, to European countries or United States or OECD countries who are more developed, and therefore their works are really on technology, ICTs, AI, because that's their specialization. So there. Also, we have different productive specializations. So yun nga, although we are industrializing, we are still largely an agricultural society, and therefore most of our productions, most of our innovations will be, a little bit of that will be, gearing towards agricultural work. And then we have cognitive specializations as well. So based on the education institutions that we have in a certain country, then it's the type of experts that we have. Alright, and then again, it's also important here that it is shaped by history. So for instance, our ability to be able to innovate in relation to ICTs in par with other developed communities is because of our history of being colonized with Anglophone Americans. Our ability to be able to converse in English places us in a certain position wherein we can innovate or we can collaborate better with English-speaking company or countries compared to non-English-speaking ones with the same economic standing, because of our history and our previous experiences. It's also important to know that knowledge is sticky, meaning we might, in terms of history, we might be forgetful, but the knowledge that we learn, especially in terms of scientific discoveries, it's sticky, it sticks, especially in the day of age wherein it's easy to publish your work, it's easy to put your research out there. And then also at the same time, knowledge in terms of the knowledge that we put into organizations to make them work. It's going to stick in terms of organizational memory. It does not circulate easily from one place to another. It's embodied in the minds and bodies of people in routine business, especially when these are formalized into policies and procedures, in memoranda, when these are also put into formal articulated laws. So this now becomes a part of our unspoken, and taken for granted cultural ideologies eventually, and interpersonal and inter-organizational relationships. And therefore, these cultural ideologies and these learned patterns that we have over time becomes habitual, becomes institutionalized and normalized in our society, and eventually becomes a part of becomes a part of our day-to-day living without us even knowing that this is something out of the ordinary. And like for instance, no, probably hopefully, 1 year from now or less, we survive out of this pandemic. We all return to face to face. But since knowledge is sticky, I assume that Canvas, hybrid learning, online learning will be something that's going to be here to stay. Distance learning will be something that will stick into our organization. And also the whole of the Philippines being one of the countries with the longest time we've had remote learning, it's going to stick with us. So even if COVID ends, we'll be able to still use that as a part of, and it will eventually become second nature to us. No, it will not be a peculiarity, like how it felt during the first few months of the pandemic. So yon. Next, individuals, companies, and other organizations never innovate in complete isolation. So yun ang sinasabi natin. No? So we need organizations and different other organizations to be able to really, completely innovate. We need logistics, we need suppliers, we need other people, we need partnerships in order for us to create something new. And to study the relation in an interactionist perspective is needed. Probably you can also look at it, the power dynamics between larger organizations, between lower organizations or smaller organizations. You talk about, the dynamics between government, and of course, the transparency practices of the government and academia, academia to academia. So there are organizational interactions that you look at, and you probably have learned of this, in your sociology of organizations, in your organizational sociology. Also, the actors are not the same, they're heterogeneous. So, in the story of an innovation, you'll see different people from different walks of life, from different organizations. You'll see scientists working together with the CDC, with the government, with the they also be working with marketing champions like influencers, to put this innovation into place, to innovate, to diffuse these innovations. So when we talk about innovation, as we've learned in the networks analysis of innovation, as we've learned also in terms of the extent to which innovations happen as networks of, most likely we get innovations from acquaintances rather than friends. We know that the more heterogeneous, the more diverse the background of the people working in innovations and the organizations working on innovations, the more differentiated the ideas will be. It requires an analytical approach of a holistic, interdisciplinary, and historico-evolutionary kind. So when we look at innovations happening from a national context, for example, in the Philippines, we have to look at it from historical perspective. We have to see it from different disciplines, and we have to see them as a whole, as specific parts of an innovation working as a whole. And therefore, in studying national innovation systems, we talk about the organizations involved in making an innovative culture in a certain economy. We talk about the different institutions that foster innovations, and we talk about the relations that these organizations and institutions have with each other, in order for us to come up easy or hard, in terms of coming up with new innovations. So organizations like specific companies or organizations, and then institutions like we talk about government, we talk about academia, we talk about private sector, we talk about banking, sometimes even religion. For instance, we talk about how innovative are we in terms of reproductive technologies. And one of the reasons why in the Philippines, while it is only in the recent period wherein we have our reproductive technologies become more accessible and easy to diffuse, it's because there's a lot of pushback in terms of the religious institutions, right? in terms of making reproductive technologies such as contraceptives available, diba? And you know, the passing of the Reproductive Health Act, you know, took some time. So the relations between, you know, civil society organizations, the the education sector, and the ability of religion to infiltrate educational institutions, government institution, paved the way in the extent to which we are able to innovate our technologies in relation to reproductive health, and also in terms of the processes that we have. No? So we have it better now because it's more accessible. There's lesser stigma in terms of accessing this innovation. There are funding available. There are public funding available in terms of improving use and improving actual reproductive technologies, which we didn't have, you know, decades ago, because we now have laws. You know? So that's the reason why we have to look at innovations and production, the diffusion, the impact of innovation from a systemic perspective, you know, looking at how all of these things, you know, work together, because that's one example, that's one case, reproductive technology. Of course, geopolitical boundaries must be set, no? Kasi for instance, no, the organizational structure of the government of the Philippines would be different from, for instance, a monarchy or a parliament, no? We might have different, you know, we might have similar ministries or departments from other countries, with other countries, like for example, Department of Education, Department of Science and Technologies, but within their bureaucracy, they might have a different person who handles certain things. You know? And of course, geopolitical boundaries also talks about, you know, what are the legal affordances that a certain country have in terms of making it easy to innovate or making it hard to innovate. You know, give an example, yung kanina sa reproductive technologies. Kaya siya National Innovation Systems. It's because we understand that the nation as a whole, you know, is a system that is, of course, open system pa rin naman siya, but still it's bounded. And the things that are found within that system, the organization, institutions, and the relationships that they have amongst each other influence the innovation in that specific area. Not to discount, of course, that globalization is there, you know, not to discount that we have foreign partners. But again, when we talk about here, the foreign partners and globalization, they operate, of course, within the geopolitical affordances that we provide for them, right? So the main function of NIS is to develop, diffuse, and use innovation. So very straightforward. Now, different countries would articulate this different ways. You know? In the Philippines, our innovation system really is headed by, of course, the Department of Science and Technology. And of course, the Department of Science and Technology has different partners within the government, like DepEd, as CHED, you know, Department of Agriculture also for the agricultural innovations, and many, many others. You know? And of course, the academia is also there, public universities, private universities, you know. These are and then of course, private sectors, you know, commercializing the innovations also a part. Now, how easy it is to do a startup in the Philippines, right? How easy is it to get a patent in the Philippines, right? And how much support would you give a Filipino scientist for them to pursue a specific innovation? That is what, you know, we talk about in terms of NIS. And there's not one easy answer for those questions, diba? And there's not one specific institution that we look at. You know, when you talk about it, does a Filipino scientist have the means to be able to work on their innovation? That's a very nuanced, an answer with a nuanced, a question with a very nuanced answer. And you cannot pinpoint, DOST yan. But, you know, it's not just DOST, but there are so many factors. And that's why we're looking at this from an integrated innovation systemic approach. So, what are the different functions and activities of the innovation system? So, one, of course, to produce new knowledge to research and development. There are different there are different measures of how to look at research and development. So how do we measure this in terms of a country? So usually is the public and the private expenditures used for R&D. No, so yun ang nire-report dyan. And then siguro usually when you look at studies regarding NIS, you would see is the public spending for R&D decreasing the economic inequality in a specific country, and then they would plot the lines across the years in terms of how much money did we spend for R&D per year, what is our Gini coefficient, or Gini coefficient is kind of an economic indicator of economic inequality in a country, and then they plot it over a long period of time, and you would see pag tumaas ba yung R&D expenditure, bumababa ba yung Gini coefficient, tumataas ba yung GDP natin or yung GNP natin. So those are some of the questions used or asked by NIS researchers. And next is to build skills for human capital through school, university education system, and vocational training. So big part of this is human capital improvement, human capital development. Siyempre, sino mag-R&D kung walang researcher? No? Who's gonna do the research and development when we do not train researchers? And of course, it's I'll give you a chance in your assignment to talk about, what is the extent, in the Philippine innovation system, what is the extent to which we develop human capital, how accessible is education for science or for STEM in the Philippines and related fields, right? And when you do get to graduate from a STEM degree, to what extent will you be willing to apply that? To what work is available for you, and when you do get to that work, how much are you being paid? So those are many questions, And anyway, I'll allow you to evaluate that later when you do the assignment. And then to establish new markets for products, this is very important. And when you talk about a good example for this, one of my good example for this is, for instance, the production of the Lagundi, the Lagundi capsule or the syrup for cough, which received a lot of backlash. I remember. I don't know if I've told this story before, but there was the one who spearheaded that project of trying to medicinalize herbal medicine was, of course, confronted with a lot of stigma from his peers because medicine during the time was very curative, was very biochemical related, and they didn't really consider herbal medicines as a legitimate, mainstream form of intervention for coughs, etc., until they get to develop the Lagundi, But the one thing that's important there is that they were able to develop it as a product, and they were able to pull in resources in order to market it as a product, and now it became a very, very stringent competitor against the branded ones, the generic medicines and the mainstream medicines, to the point that they're really trashing each other in TV commercials. But when you talk about Lagundi, it's that story is it's a minority story, because when you go to when you look at chemistry departments across universities, when you look at biology departments across universities, at botany departments, yearly they produce a lot of theses, masters, bachelors, PhD thesis on potentials of plants and animals and biological products for medicine, but none of them really get to the market. And again, innovation, while that is a part of it, research is a part of it, developing it into something that could be used is another thing, and putting it out into the market is another thing as well. And that is where the innovation systems usually fail, because you train people, sure, you allow R&D, sure, but does the R&D really reach the people? So and then therefore markets are important. Next, define qualitative requirements for new product based on the needs of the demands. No? So, for example, when a new vaccine comes in, diba, do we allow it to be a part of our formulation? No, do we give an FDA approval for it? No, and because when you have qualitative requirements, diba, within that national system, the researchers, the scientists already know the boundaries. No? What do they need to do in order for them to get those things that they develop into the market? The next is to create and modify organizations necessary for the development of new fields of innovation. And this is something that is not only just for the government. No? Like for example, when you talk about innovation in terms of health, no, we didn't have much innovations in terms of alternative medicine. We didn't have much in terms of mental health. But, as we go along, because of the Mental Health Act, because of the funding that we are now affording for those who want to do ethnobotanical research to look into possible ways of replicating the success of Lagundi. Those would need organizational affordances, diba? That would need a separate committee within the school, a new department within the school. You look at, for example, our organization, our university, when we develop new programs, because we feel like this is a new area of an innovation, diba? Now we have a specific data science center because we know that in the future that's going to have a market when we innovate in that area of study. And that's why our university doesn't stop in terms of looking at new programs we can offer, because when we offer new programs, we produce new human capital for us to be able to produce new knowledge in that area, and that knowledge hopefully gets translated to new innovations that would get into the market. And that needs organizational affordances, whether or not you're talking about public, academic, or private sectors. Again, like I said, diba? Organizations, big organizations, they have R&D committees. MSMEs, wala masyado. Sa mga small and medium enterprises. But if they can afford it, they can have an R&D committee, and therefore pag mayroong person na to talk in doing innovations, then mas maraming innovations ang magagawa. Kung wala, di wala. No? Same thing, no? Look at smaller schools, they don't have research centers. So if the school has no research center, no research director, you would assume na hindi tayo magkakaroon ng research for that. Unlike our university, no, na we have different research centers, and therefore diversified din yung ating outcomes in terms of knowledge. So organizational affordances, organizational structures are very important in terms of being able to create new things and innovations. Next, to generate market and non-market networks to facilitate the circulation of knowledge, translation of knowledge. Ito medyo, dito tayo mahina, in terms of the Philippines, which needs to be, which can be, the ability to, tap into private sectors, who will be potential users of the innovation that has been done, either by government sector, government-funded agencies, or academe. But I guess a big important factor for that is transparency, the public trust in general, diba? I think when there's public trust, it's easier for you to network. And this is not only just public trust in the government, but public trust in general for the organizations involved. If low trust sa organization ninyo, you will most likely not get networks. And that's the reason why you get ISO, you get quality assurances. Right? That's the reason why you get you do credentializing. Diba? You get all of these accreditations because that increases your public trust. When your public trust increases, that will most likely increase your ability to network with people and be a recipient of or a giver of whatever innovative idea or product that can become a viable thing that can be diffused into the market. Next, to create and modify institutions that are able to provide useful ties and incentives for innovation. So very important, our the ability to put people together. Because, diba, again, like I said, like we have discussed, no, usually it is the people who do not know each other in a very intimate way. They're the ones who usually get to innovate the best ones. But the point is, if they don't know each other, how will they meet? And the innovation systems must be able to foster that, no? And so that's the reason why when you talk about, magastos lang yung mga conference. Why does the science community always go on conferences? Why does the government always have all of these functions? Well, I do agree that they can get excessive sometimes. But this is one of the reasons why. Because we want to be able to start those ties. Because without those conferences, without those conventions, without those events, no, that are usually not really scientific in nature, although they're usually tied with the scientific event, it's important to build those ties, right? So conventions, symposiums are going to be here to stay, and that's why as a scientist myself, I miss that because I don't get to meet new people who could be potential collaborators, right? Because it's hard to really establish that connection with Zoom. Anyway, and of course, very important, forever and ever, is incentives. Because innovation entails money. In social science research, if you want to do a national study, it will take you around 10 million, 20 million. So just imagine the amount of money that you need if you want to do genomic testing. That costs you 40, 50 million. You're gonna get that money, and that's, again, going back to the very, very beginning, how much money, how much expenditure, public and private expenditures, do we give for scientists to work on their project? But also another issue is that there are incentives. The problem is some of these incentives are not tapped. Why? Because all of the scientists have already their projects with them. And again, goes back to the issue of human capital. Kasi wala masyadong scientists. Yung mga scientists na gumagawa ngayon, overburdened na ng kanilang mga sariling subject, sa kanilang mga projects na even though enticing yung incentive na binibigay ng gobyerno or ng private or ng civil society organization, they won't tap it. Why? Because you're overburdened. So, who's gonna tap the incentives? No one. And that's the reason why it's important to produce human capital. That's why we are giving scholarships for STEM, because who's gonna use those incentives? So, most of the time, when a fiscal year ends, usually positive, Talagang may positive ang ending, meaning maraming unused incentives kasi wala nag-apply because kulang sa human capital. Human capital not only because kulang tayo sa scientists, but also because there are scientists that are trained they do not know a lot about grant writing, that they have incentives that are available for them. They don't know how to apply for incentives, or they're not really good at research in general. And I've experienced this because I've seen institutions, I've come from institutions that are not really research incentive. So that's when we talk about human capital, those are some of the things that we have to look into. To carry out incubation activities in support of new initiatives, you look at the patient capital, if you remember that idea. When you talk about long-term goals that cannot be funded by private institutions, but you think that are more impactful to society, incubation activities, patient capital, very important. Next, to ensure funding for innovation. I've said so much about this earlier. Next, to provide qualified consultancy services, technology transfer, commercial and legal information. That's true. Because sometimes if a scientist knows about his science, but the scientist does not know their legal rights and how they can commercialize it. Like I said, there are many theses, there are many dissertations produced every single year in the Philippines in terms of STEM. New ways of doing things. New potential chemicals found in plants that could be anti-cancer. Or they never see the light of day in terms of innovations because they don't have the capacity for technology transfer. Technology transfer means, okay, from now you've seen that this leaf from a specific plant has an anti-cancer property. So that's what you as a biologist talk about. So how do you make it a drug? How do you make it an anti-cancer intervention? That's technology transfer, which usually kulang, no? And this is not only a problem in the Philippines. That is a problem everywhere. It's just that some countries do better in terms of technology transfer compared to the Philippines, no? Yeah. Now, according to Lundvall, no? Lundvall, yeah. There are 4 reasons why in the modern capitalism where we are, no, innovation is inescapable. Why there is, why we have innovation, is that first, innovation is constitutive and ubiquitous. It is spread throughout the economic fabric and involves continuous processes of learning. So it's always going to be there, no? Because of competition, because of free market, you need to innovate. Next, it's gradual and cumulative. It consists of new combination based on previously available knowledge, opportunities, and components which are combined in a different way, introducing a variable level of radical discontinuity with the past, no? Next, we have processual. It does not consist of a single event, but a series of activities linked to and influencing each other, with a blurring of classical distinctions between invention, innovation, and diffusion. Because the diffusion in itself can also be an innovation. Market innovation, process innovation. Okay? Next, it's interactive and collective. Learning is configured in relational terms. And knowledge is a common good that is shared within networks and organizations, and that is going to be the basis for innovation. So, in all modern capitalist societies, merong ganito. So, these are some of the things that are seen, no, in modern capitalist societies such as ours. Okay, so according to Lundvall, there are 4 types of knowledge that are found in a knowledge economy. We have the know what and the know why. Basically, it is the knowledge of facts and the principles to explain why these facts happen. The know who refers to the practical knowledge and skills needed to perform. The know-how refers to the practical knowledge and the skill to perform the specific task. And the know who refers to the knowledge and social skills to knowledge about people to build interpersonal relationships. And this knowledge is important to be built, no, in an innovation system. So as we explained, for every society, no, their NAS is specific to institutional, cultural, and historical differences. We have their own, and that's going to be the basis for your assignment in relation to this lecture. So in this video, we talked about why we can look at innovations in a society in a systemic manner, and then we talked about the theoretical assumptions of innovation systems, and then we talked about the different features of national innovation systems.